All right, guys, welcome back to Pragmatic Bodybuilding, or I can say welcome to real world bodybuilding. So I want to give you guys an update as far as what's going on in my world. And like I mentioned in videos before, I was pushing hard for the WNBF Muscle Mayhem, which is just over a week away while I'm recording this. But a couple weeks back, I realized that my conditioning just isn't where it needs to be, and I knew it wasn't going to get there in time to be ready to stand next to some of the best athletes in the world. And the other coaches are going to be competing there as well, Eric, Brad, and Berto. And honestly, kind of knowing that I wasn't going to be a part of that with them, it's tough. We talked about, all four of us doing the same show, at the same time, and, not being able to do that, it's definitely stinging me a little bit. But at the same time, I know the guys completely understand as far as what's been going on in my world, and they're fully in support of whatever I want to do. But this prep has been probably one of the hardest I've had in a long while. Not so much, physically, but more so mentally. When you've been training for nearly 40 years and competing for over 30, it's kind of easy to lose some of that spark. And I've definitely felt that at times during this prep. And I'm not ashamed to say I was, a little complacent early on with my prep. But I don't feel bad about it either, because I've done a lot in this sport. I've won shows, earned pro cards, won pro shows. I'm a co-founder of 3D Muscle Journey. So it's been a long and rewarding run in this sport. But eventually, I started to find, my groove with the prep. I had some moments where I caught some fire and I was getting some good momentum. Then, as some of you know, I lost my brother-in-law in July. My wife's brother passed away. So that was really hard. It was a hard time in our lives. Prep came to a complete stop, rightfully so. And, honestly, life itself, kind of came to a stop. So I had to be there for my wife and for my family. And, that's where my focus just really needed to be. But once things started to settle down a bit, I got back into the prep again, but I knew I was really behind at that point. So that's when I started pushing really hard. Long step counts, really low calories, just really grinding, trying to make up some ground. And I did hit some new lows, on the scale, but at the same time, the look just wasn't there. I was starting to look very flat, very tired, really run down. And of course, being flat in prep is normal, and it's fixable, with some refeeds, maybe a diet break. But this flat felt different. I took a photo of a front double bicep in shorts and t-shirt, and compared it to one from back in 2014. And the difference, it kind of shocked me a little bit. And, of course, looking at it, I was like, man, I look like I lost muscle. And, I thought, okay, I can make an excuse, chalk it up to my age, because back then I was 43. Now I'm 54. But, deep down, I kind of know that's not it. Like, I just knew I was just severely depleted. So I told myself, let's just take a couple refeed days, let's fill out, and then we'll just keep going after that, because I didn't want to give up on, being up there with the guys, but the ego, it was starting to get the best of me a little bit. And the reason I'm saying that is right after that, the family and I, we were up at Apple Hill, and we were enjoying our day. We were, eating some food. My wife and I did some beer tasting, and all this, of course, was accounted in my refeed. But as we were leaving, my son challenged me to a foot race. He's like, "Dad, I can beat you in a race." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't think so." And he's like, "Well, if you beat me, I know I can run a lot further than you." And of course, my ego's like, "Nope, that ain't gonna happen either." But in my head, at the same time, I kind of knew it was a bad idea, you know, because at 54, I haven't ran a sprint in a few years. And, you know, to try to do that now, I was like, yeah, probably not a good idea. But my wife, she was kind of egging me on as well. You know, she was pulling her phone out, just saying, come on, he wants to race you, just go ahead and do it. So I ended up racing him, and I'll say this, like, I can still move decently fast for being 54. And I won the race. Granted, he was dealing with his pants falling down, but I know I would have beat him anyways. The only problem is I tweaked my lower back in the process. I didn't feel it right away when it happened, but later that night, you know, I was watching the football game. I got off the couch. I went to go upstairs to go to bed, and my gosh, like, it was really painful. So that pretty much changed everything, you know, with the prep. I kind of knew right there, like, okay, recovery needs to come first. And, you know, keeping myself in a severe deficit, you know, just hammering away at the step counts, you know, not the smartest thing to do. So I pulled my food up to maintenance, cut my activity way back, but I didn't stop it altogether, because obviously if you're just laying on the couch all day long, it's going to probably make matters worse. You know, with the low back, I'm going to get even stiffer. So I still made it a point to get in some short walks, but overall the activity was way down. And after about a week of that, my back definitely felt better, and my physique actually looked a lot better as well. Like, I was fuller, I was less stringy, I looked healthier overall. The scale weight was up though, but again, I looked and felt way better, and, you know, I had better energy. You know, the hunger was a little bit lower as well. So everything, you know, was kind of clicking in a sense. And by the second week, you know, I felt about 80% recovered. And then now, about 3 weeks later, I'm 95% recovered. So I've been easing myself back into a deficit, but nowhere near as aggressive as it was. So instead of like hitting 13 to 16,000 steps, I'm around 8 to 10,000 now. And the calories, instead of being like 15 to 1700, it's more like 18 to 2000 calories. And what's cool is that I'm hitting similar lows on the scale that I was prior to the low back issue, when I was like really digging, but I just look way better at the same weight now. So that's when it kind of just reinforced, you know, everything that I already know, and exactly what I do with all my athletes that I prep, is that I was just pushing way too hard. And, you know, if I was going to keep going like that, it was going to end up being a bad product. So I think in a way, the low back strain was a blessing in disguise, because it reminded me that the pace matters, being conservative matters. And this is what I always want to do with my athletes. And this is what I always preach, is that when we set up a prep, we want to make sure that we're losing 0.5 to 1% of our body weight per week. And also we're allowing some time for, you know, real world events, you know, whether it's, you know, holidays, anniversaries, you know, vacations, you have some, you know, some mishaps like myself with a low back strain. Like, we have time to account for those things. So, you know, taking a conservative pace is always the better way to go, physically, mentally, and emotionally. So now, you know, now that my mindset has shifted back to where it should be, you know, I'm still holding out some hope that I can compete on December 6th. There's an NPC show in the Bay Area that I'm thinking of doing. That date to me is pretty special, because December 6th, 1986 was the first day I ever lifted weights. So being on stage exactly 40 years later would be a really cool way to celebrate that anniversary. But I'm not going to force it. You know, I'm going to see how I'm feeling that week. If I'm ready, I'll go ahead and do it. If not, then I'll basically just kind of just hold steady through December and then start my prep back up in January, aiming for early 2026 to get on stage. So I'm not really seeing any of this as a failure, not getting on stage this year, if I don't make it, because this year has been pretty darn tough. It's been a really good teacher for me. I've learned a lot about myself, about what's really important in life, not that I didn't know already. So I guess it was just reinforcing, as far as what my priorities are. And it reminded me not to rush the process, something that, again, tell my athletes all the time. I just lost sight of that, trying to keep up with everybody else, not wanting to miss out on the mayhem with the other coaches. So, all in all, it's still been a really good year for me. It's been very humbling, of course, but I find it pretty successful, and one of the perks of the prep lifestyle, as far as eating really healthy, moving a lot, as far as good step counts, lifting heavy things, it's kept me super healthy. My blood work, my doctor checkups, they're perfect. And that's what really matters most to me, especially, at this age. And as I get closer to 60, that's hard for me to fathom that I'm only about 5.5 years away from that. But from a physique standpoint, I'm doing okay. I'm sitting around 175 to 176 pounds. Not too far off from, stage condition. Once I get down to around 167 to 168, that's when I'm truly shredded. And even if I just stay in the low 170s, through December, that's still a very solid look. It's a good starting point to, pick and prep back up in January. So right now, it's no issues at all as far as maintaining this weight or even getting down a little further, because I feel great right now. I'm not starving. My energy is really good. Sleep is actually improved too by not going as aggressive with the deficit. And that's usually not the case at this body weight. In years past, when I'm, at this stage of a prep, at this body weight, I'm having some sleep issues, but it's been pretty solid as of late. Overall, just a big change since tweaking my lower back and how I've been managing my step counts and the training now. Before, I was just doing way too much in singular sessions, getting steps on the treadmill. I was spending an hour at a time, and sometimes twice a day doing that. And then with training, even though I was only training 3 days per week, those sessions, tended to be a little too long for my liking. Sometimes it would last hour and 15, hour and a half. And then you, again, add an hour of treadmill work to that. So spending a lot of time in the gym. So what I've been doing the last couple of weeks is, as far as treadmill work, I'll do 20 minutes first thing in the morning after a cup of coffee. Goes by pretty quick. It's just 20 minutes. And then before lunch, I'll do another 10 minutes. And then before I weight train, I'll do another 10 minutes, and that acts as a nice warm up prior to my training, gets the body temperature elevated. And then post training, I'll toss in 15 minutes. So I'm getting, close to an hour per day by splitting it up that way. And physically and mentally, it's a lot easier to get through that. It just feels like a breeze in a sense. So that's been working well, and same approach to my weight training. So instead of running that 3-day split, I've now broken a lot of that work up into 5 shorter sessions. So in a sense, doing 2 to 3 exercises per day for the most part, and doing 2 to 3 sets each. It feels like I'm in and out of the gym pretty quickly. The quality is really high, and I'm recovering a lot better, and just overall mentally it's not as taxing. And if you guys are interested to see exactly how I'm kind of structuring that split, just let me know in the comments, and I'll make a video next time of breaking it all down. But anyways, I'm going to wrap it up here. It's been a tough year, but it's been a good one, in so many different ways. And I'm very grateful for it. Even after nearly 40 years of being in the game, I'm still learning about myself. I'm still learning about this sport. And I don't know everything there is to know. And I think that's what's keeping me going, like in a sense, like keeping that spark lit. I'm not always like burning bright like a big ass flame, but there was always a spark, and that's helping me to be curious and always looking for ways to try to improve and move myself forward. But I'll leave it there, guys. If you got any comments, questions, drop them down below. I'll do my best to get in there and interact with you guys. But keep yourself safe, have a great week, and we'll definitely talk with the next one.